Have you ever spent years pouring love, time, and energy into someone, only to realize one day that you're the only one doing the reaching out? Maybe it's a phone call that never comes, or a message left unanswered. And slowly, without even noticing, you begin to wonder, what would happen if I just stopped? If I stopped chasing the connection, stopped being the one who always tries? What if I let the silence speak for me? If you've ever felt this way about your children, I want you to know you're not alone. So many parents, especially later in life, feel the ache of emotional distance. And not because of anger or dramatic fallouts. No, it's usually something quieter. A slow drift. A sense that you've become background noise in a life you helped build. And that's exactly why today, we're talking about something both powerful and deeply personal. What your children actually feel when you stop looking for them. Not out of bitterness, not to play games, but from a place of strength, of knowing your worth and choosing to live with clarity, purpose, and emotional balance. At the heart of this mindset is the understanding that we cannot control others. We can only control our own actions, our own thoughts, our own emotional responses. And when you stop looking for your children, when you let go of the endless reaching, something begins to shift. In them and in you. Let's imagine this together for a moment. Picture your son or daughter waking up in the morning. For years, maybe you've been the one sending a message to check in, asking how they're doing, offering to help, sharing a photo, a kind word, a memory. And suddenly, it stops. Not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, intentional pause. The phone doesn't buzz. The inbox stays empty. You're not gone, but you're no longer chasing. At first, they may not notice. Life moves fast, after all. They're busy. Work, kids, responsibilities. But a few days pass, then a week, and something feels different. The rhythm has changed. The music, so to speak, has softened. There's a pause where your voice used to be. And that's where the first emotion often begins. A sense of quiet surprise. They were used to you being there. Not because they consciously appreciated it, but because it was predictable. Safe. Like background warmth. Like the sun rising every morning. They didn't think about it, but they felt it. And now, without your check-ins, without your gentle reminders of love, there's an unexpected silence. That silence can be louder than any words you've ever said. And slowly, often without even realizing it, a new feeling begins to grow. Discomfort. Not the kind that makes them angry or upset, but the kind that makes them wonder. Why haven't I heard from Mom? Or Dad? Are they okay? Are they pulling away? It's in that discomfort that the next feeling takes root. Reflection. For the first time in perhaps a long time, your child is given the space to consider what role you've really played in their life. Not in the dramatic moments, the graduations or emergencies, but in the ordinary, everyday heartbeat of their world. They start to remember things they hadn't thought about in years. The way you always made time for their worries. How you remembered the little details of their life when others forgot. The small texts that seemed insignificant, now missed. And that's where realization sets in. Realization of your value. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That sometimes people don't see what they had until it's not constantly in front of them. When you were always there, always showing up, your presence blended into the scenery. Familiar, reliable, expected. But when you step back, the picture changes. You're no longer the soft cushion to fall on, the bridge that always closes the distance. You become, for the first time in a long time, someone they have to look for, someone whose presence is no longer guaranteed. And it's not about punishing them. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about clarity. Because here's the truth, my friend. Your love, your time, your energy, they are not infinite, and they are not to be wasted. If your presence has become something others take for granted, then stepping back is not rejection. It's wisdom. It's dignity. And as you do, something else beautiful starts to unfold, not just in them, but in you. You begin to notice the stillness, and within it, your own needs. You begin to reconnect with your independence, your strength, your peace. The time you used to spend checking in or waiting for a reply, now it's time spent nurturing your garden, taking a quiet walk, writing in your journal, calling someone who truly lights up when they hear your voice. You begin to grow, not because you've let go of love, but because you've released the need for it to always be returned in the way you hoped. And as you grow, your child feels something unexpected, a void. Now that might sound dramatic, but think about it. Your presence filled a space. Your care softened hard days. And your absence, even a quiet, dignified one, leaves behind an echo. One that lingers. One that speaks. They feel it when something good happens, and you're not the first to know. They feel it when life gets hard, and they instinctively reach for their phone, only to remember you haven't reached out either. And in those moments, whether they admit it or not, a truth begins to rise. They miss you. Not just your messages, not just your attention. You, your insight, your warmth, your way of seeing them even when they forgot to look at themselves. And here's the most important part. This is when your absence becomes your voice. It speaks volumes, not in anger, not in guilt, but in quiet strength. It reminds them of who you are, what you gave, and what they may have failed to appreciate. Now, not every child will respond the same way. Some may feel that sting and reach out. Others may retreat deeper, unsure of how to fix what feels broken. And sadly, some may not feel much at all. But even that is clarity. Even that is a kind of peace, because it tells you where you truly stand. And once you know, you are free. Free to stop hoping for change that never comes. Free to invest your love in people who return it. Free to live not in the shadows of relationships that leave you empty, but in the light of your own wholeness. So if you're sitting with that ache right now, that longing to be seen, heard, valued, I want you to know this. Stepping back doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you unloving. It makes you wise. It gives your child the chance to feel the silence, to hear it, and maybe, just maybe, to start making music again, this time from their side. Because when you stop chasing, you leave space for the other person to step forward. If they choose to. If they're ready. And if not, you'll know that you walked away with grace. You'll know that your absence spoke, not out of bitterness, but from a place of deep, quiet power. And there's something quietly powerful in that. Something timeless. Let's take a breath here, together. You've done more than enough. You've shown up time and time again. Now, it's okay to let the silence speak for you. They may not admit it, not out loud, not even to themselves at first. But as the days stretch into weeks, your absence keeps whispering to them. It shows up in unexpected ways. A holiday rolls around, and for the first time, it's them who notices the silence where your voice used to be. Or maybe it's something even smaller. A quiet evening when they're scrolling through old photos and see your face smiling back. And in that moment, something shifts. That quiet tug they've been ignoring turns into a real ache, a sense of longing. Longing for the connection they once took for granted. Longing for the person who always made space for them, who listened without judgment, who never needed an excuse to reach out. That longing doesn't come with fireworks. It's more subtle, but it's persistent. And the more they sit with it, the more they begin to understand what your presence truly meant. They begin to notice the space you used to fill, not just in their schedule, but in their heart. And that longing, it grows. Because real connection once felt deeply doesn't disappear. It might be buried under pride or busyness, but when you stop chasing, It has room to rise to the surface. And now comes a feeling that might surprise them even more. Regret. Regret doesn't always hit like a wave. Sometimes it starts as a whisper. I should have called them back sooner. Why didn't I say thank you? I didn't realize how much they were doing for me. At first, they brush it off. It's uncomfortable to feel regret, especially towards someone who's always been there. But the more they reflect, the more they realize how easily they let your effort become an expectation, the sharper that regret becomes. They might recall a time when you waited for them to show up, and they didn't. A birthday forgotten, a conversation cut short, a promise left dangling. And they begin to wonder, was I fair to them? Did I give back what they gave me? Did I make them feel loved? Or just used? That sting is the beginning of self-awareness, the kind that asks us to examine not just our words, but the shape of our actions, the weight of our choices. And if your child is honest with themselves, they'll feel that sting not as punishment, but as truth. Truth that maybe they could have done better. That maybe you pulled back not out of spite, but because your love deserved more than what it was getting. And while that truth may be hard to hold, it's also the beginning of growth. It's funny how much we see in hindsight, isn't it? All the little ways we fall short, not because we're unkind, but because we're unthinking. And that's what your absence invites them into: thinking, remembering, reevaluating. And as they sit with that mix of longing and regret, a new feeling begins to emerge, something they might not have expected at all: curiosity. You see, when you were always reaching out, always available, they knew where to find you. They knew what you were doing. You were a presence so consistent they never had to wonder. But now there's a question mark. Where are you? Are you doing okay? Are you happy? And perhaps more interestingly, what are you doing with your time now that you're not spending it on them? Curiosity has a funny way of sparking connection. They may find themselves thinking about you at random times, wondering who you've been talking to, what books you're reading, whether you're spending your afternoons in the garden or walking with a neighbor, whether you're reconnecting with old friends, whether you've moved on. And with that curiosity comes another surprising realization: you've changed. The version of you they're imagining now is stronger, calmer, maybe even more joyful. Not because you've shut them out, but because you've turned your focus inward. You've stopped waiting. You've started living. And that change? It's magnetic. Because deep down, everyone wants to be around someone who's whole, someone who shines quietly, someone who doesn't chase, but still loves. This version of you, rooted in self-respect, lifted by peace, isn't a retreat. It's a return. A return to who you've always been before the emotional imbalance crept in. You begin to reappear in their mind, not as someone desperate to connect, but as someone worth reconnecting with. And that's where the intrigue begins. It pulls at them. It lingers. Because when a person who used to need us no longer does, we look again. And this time, we really see them. The curiosity builds not just around what you're doing, but who you've become. And whether they realize it or not, they're beginning to admire you in a new light. They might not say it, but inside, the questions swirl. How are they so okay? How are they not crumbling without me? How did they find peace when I can't even figure out my own schedule? That quiet strength of yours, it doesn't go unnoticed. And the most powerful part? You didn't have to shout. You didn't have to beg. You simply stepped back. Let your absence say what words could never fully express. That your love was a gift, one freely given, but never owed. And in that pause, in that beautiful silence, you've done something remarkable. You've reminded them that love is not something to be used, it's something to be honored. So now, they're not just missing you. They're wondering about you, maybe even admiring you. And for some, that leads to a decision. A desire to reconnect, not from habit, not out of guilt, but because they choose to, because they see you now. Not just as mom or dad, not just as the dependable parent, but as a person, with depth, with dignity, with a life beyond them. And you're no longer just the giver. You're the one who stood tall when the giving wasn't returned. The one who walked away not in bitterness, but in grace. That's the quiet power of inner strength. Not to harden our hearts, but to soften the noise. To stand still while others flail. To find meaning in our own actions, not in how others react. And when it comes to parenting, especially later in life, that's a power worth holding close. Because no matter how old our children get, we still carry that desire to protect, to guide, to stay close. But closeness must be mutual. And love, real love, shouldn't be one-sided. It should breathe on both ends. And if it doesn't, it's okay to step back. Not to cut them off, but to make room for something healthier, truer, stronger. You've earned the right to live peacefully, to wake up in the morning without waiting for a call that doesn't come, to go to sleep without wondering what more you could have done. You've already done more than enough. So if your child is feeling the pull, the ache, the regret, that's theirs to carry now. Not as a burden, but as a doorway. A way back, if they choose it. And if they don't, you still stand strong, still whole, still deeply, beautifully, unshakably you. And now, as that quiet longing deepens and the curiosity swells into something more emotional, something unexpected begins to bloom within your child. A new kind of awareness, not just about you, but about themselves. Your silence has become a mirror, a space where they can see not just what they lost, but what they may have never fully understood. And in that reflection, something else often takes shape, the desire to reconnect. This desire doesn't always come in a grand gesture. Sometimes it begins with a single question whispered late at night. Could we go back? Or more humbly, could we begin again? It might show up as a text that feels a little softer than usual, or a voicemail left without fanfare, just a quiet, "Hey, I was thinking about you." And if that moment comes, you'll know. Because it won't come from obligation. It won't come from pressure. It will come from recognition. They've realized now that the relationship was never about how often you showed up, it was about how deeply. They see now that your love wasn't a given, it was a gift. A constant presence, not because you had nothing else to do, but because you chose to love over and over, even when it went unnoticed. And now that you've stepped back, that space you left behind, it's not just empty, it's meaningful. It reminds them of what you brought, who you were, and how they feel without that presence in their life. And just as importantly, they begin to see the strength you found in your absence. They see a parent who didn't fall apart, who didn't chase, who didn't guilt or beg, but who grew. Quietly. Purposefully. They begin to realize that while they were busy with life, you were building yours again. That your days didn't stop when theirs grew silent. That your heart didn't shut down, it expanded. Into peace. Into growth. Into self-respect. That perhaps is what touches them most. Not that you pulled away, but that you blossomed while doing it. And that image stays with them. It may take time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, but it lingers, and it begins to warm something that had gone cold. Appreciation. They start to appreciate you not for what you gave, but for who you are. The grace you've carried, the love you've continued to offer without conditions, and the wisdom that led you to step back, not to hurt them, but to honor yourself. That is strength in its truest form. Not detachment for the sake of pride, but a calm, clear commitment to live in truth, to act with intention, to give when it's right, and to withdraw when it's time. You may be wondering, what happens next? That's the part none of us can control. Maybe your child will reach out. Maybe the relationship will shift. Maybe this space will become the foundation for something deeper, more mutual. But maybe not right away. And maybe not at all. And that's okay too. Because this journey hasn't just changed how they see you, it's changed how you see yourself. You've learned to sit with stillness, to welcome peace, to stop measuring your worth by who calls or doesn't, to stop defining your days by who shows up or who doesn't notice you're gone. You've reclaimed your time, your energy, your soul's quiet breath. And in doing so, you've become something rare and beautiful, a person who loves without attachment, who gives without expectation, who knows that letting go sometimes is the most powerful way to love someone. Because love doesn't mean always being present. Sometimes it means making room for others to grow. Room for you to rest. Room for honesty. It's not easy, I know. Especially as a parent. Especially when you remember the tiny fingers that once reached for yours. The scraped knees. The bedtime stories. The laughter you'd give anything to hear again. But love evolves. And sometimes it calls us to step back so that others can step forward. And maybe, just maybe, your absence won't just speak for you, it will teach for you. It will be the silent guide that helps them see what words never could. And if they return to you, it won't be because you chased. It will be because they chose. Because they saw something in your stillness that reminded them of who you are and who they want to be. And if they don't, then you'll know this. You still showed up. You still loved. You still gave. And now, finally, you've given yourself the same grace you gave them all those years. So tonight, when you sit quietly with your cup of tea, or you walk through the garden under a soft breeze, I hope you feel it. That quiet dignity that comes from letting go with love. I hope you know that stepping back wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. That your silence wasn't emptiness. It was full of truth. And that your worth was never defined by how often they called, but by how deeply you stood, even in the silence. So let this be your reminder. You are still a parent, still a giver, still a soul full of life and lessons and light. But now you're also something else, something just as powerful. You're whole, and wholeness is what draws people in. Not need, not effort, not sacrifice, but peace. So breathe that in. Let it fill your heart. Let it soften your shoulders. Let it remind you that you've done more than enough, and now it's your time to be enough for you. And if your children return, let it be because they see you, the real you, the calm, centered, quietly radiant version that was always there, just waiting to be recognized. You didn't walk away. You simply stopped standing still. You didn't stop loving. You stopped overgiving. And in doing so, you've become the kind of presence that stays with people, long after the words fade. Thank you for being here with me today. If anything in this message touched your heart, if it made you feel seen or gave you strength, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation going. Because your story, your voice, matters more than you know. And if this helped you, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. Not just for more content, but so we can keep growing this space together. A space for wisdom, for strength, and for quiet, beautiful healing. Here's to you, to your growth, to your peace, and to the love that remains, no matter where the journey takes you next. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. You are seen. And more than anything, you are worthy, now and always.